90s, which across the country was a time when a lot of business was getting more involved in supporting early education, really understanding, you know, they were bringing more women into the workforce, very much white collar too. There was a lot of support around this. As corporations, certainly locally, have gotten to have much more tight budgets, have had layoffs, we have seen that shift somewhat, and there's nowhere near the kind of business support, especially in terms of really kind of on-the-job assisting employees that there has been in the past. But I would say, as Nancy is saying, the RBA, Rochester Business Association, or Rochester Business Alliance, Sandy Parker, has really come on board as a partner around this work. They did make childcare subsidies and asked this past year on a state level and helped bring $1.74 million more to Monroe County than we'd had before. And I think do really understand it. And I think I would also just point to, there is really good research around how having a childcare subsidy for your employees who need it really helps employers. So employees are more productive on the job, and they've assessed this. Employees are more productive on the job, there's less absenteeism, they show up to work, they show up on time, they're more likely to be able to focus on the job because they're not worried about where their daughter or son is. There's less turnover, they don't have to leave their job because they're suddenly in a crisis because they don't have childcare. So there are huge benefits to employers to having steady access to childcare subsidies. And I think that we are lucky right now to have a lot of employers who understand that. I think it's finding what their role can be, and especially giving where some tighter budgets are, seeing how they can best be involved. And advocacy is one area where they can really be involved. You know, having business speak to local legislators and state legislators and say this is important to them, quite frankly, matters a lot more than me saying it, right? So that's one area where we can use their help. Anybody else?
Catch you next.
I assume these subsidies are sliding according to income, or does everybody get full subsidy?
So if you're in Monroe County prioritizes eligibility at 165% of federal poverty. When you apply, if applications are being processed, you can drop off an application anytime, but there are a lot of times where you're just going to get denied because the window's closed. But if the window's open, if you meet the requirements of income and of working, if you meet the requirements, it doesn't matter if you're 165 and Erica's 125, either of you might get it. So there's not a prioritization within that. They're really saying within 165, everybody needs this, and so it's kind of a first come, first serve until the money's gone availability.
So the whole thing is subsidized, not just...
Sure. No, the whole thing is not subsidized. Thank you. So there's a family share. Anybody who gets a subsidy is paying a copay. You have a copayment as a parent. And actually, this is another area where the state lets the county make some decisions. So Monroe County says that your copay is going to be 35% of whatever your income is above poverty. So that can quickly add up as you get even to 145, 150% of poverty. It ends up often not making sense for families because it becomes a huge chunk of their discretionary income, essentially. But there's a copay for all families.
Even the ones with very low income?
You have to pay at least $1, even though it's with very low income in Monroe County.
Yeah.
I have a statement and a question.
I'm getting your oldest chair before.
I'm 46 years old. Oh, sorry, 46 years old. And I will probably agree. I hold a master's in theology. I cannot believe that we're still talking about early childhood education as it is an expense that we can just write off. It is, as June said, an investment, but how do we help you to shift that conversation with our politicians? Because we have the power of the vote. So what ways would you suggest that we can help you all in shifting that conversation?
We have one great way tonight. Carolyn brought a colleague with her. Is Bridget still here?
Actually, I think she stepped out,
Okay.
but
There are sample letters templates, petitions, please stop at that table before you leave tonight.
I would like to. I love that you asked that question, because the best thing that everyone here can do is go home and talk about it. Go home and talk about what you heard. Go home and talk to your coworker about what's going on. If you see a coworker that you know that uses subsidy, talk to them. How do they feel? Make it a topic of conversation every day. Someone's going to hear it, and someone's going to pay attention to it. It has to be in the forefront. It has to be in the forefront of our conversations all the time. That's the only way we're going to make a change.
And in addition to talking to your neighbors and coworkers, you can also talk to your legislator. So you can call your county legislator and say, we understand that the county executive is proposing a cut to child care subsidies, and we don't support that. We want to see this put back in. And there'll be another opportunity with the state budget in a couple of months where we'll see if that's an increase or decrease or not. But really, voices and folks reaching out to their legislators is incredibly powerful, because a lot of times legislators don't hear from anyone on a lot of issues. So if they even hear from one or two people on an issue, it really stands out to them.
To your last point, can you provide us any kind of information? We know that the county legislators in the city are Democrats, and the county legislators in the suburbs are Republicans. And the county legislators in the suburbs probably would never, well, most of them are unlikely to advocate for any kind of a tax increase. And unless they understand that it's their constituents who need support, they're not going to do anything. And I think that the public conversation and the public perception is this is a city problem, and it doesn't have anything to do with white families in the suburbs. So unless you can give us information, a fact sheet that I can take to my county legislator to show it to his constituents that are suffering, I don't think that I'm going to be able to move my county legislator. And this gets to my, so if you can provide some of that, or if we in the league can figure out how to work with you to provide some of that, that's the only way I think we're going to make a difference with the legislature, if at all. The other question I had, and I don't know if you can speak to this, is I was recently at a meeting where Kelly Reed, Commissioner of DHS, gave this a little bit of time. And I couldn't quite understand her philosophy. But it sounded like that they've chosen to make this like a line in the sand and say, if the state doesn't increase our fair share, we're not doing any more than we absolutely have to. Because if we do, then we won't get it. And I don't know if you can speak to that, if I understood what she said correctly, but I just think it's a pretty poor spot to draw a line in the sand.
So one of the things I spoke a little bit about during the PowerPoint, and there is actually a chart in the report that lists all the towns in Monroe County and the number of people who would be eligible for child care subsidies. We don't know how many people in any of those towns are actually receiving subsidies, but that is a piece, and Carolyn used it today when we did a radio program, kind of effectively to talk about that need outside of the city being really a concern. I don't know the particulars of, exactly the county's thinking or strategy. I just know, kind of what the public rhetoric has been, which probably most people in the room know. But it's around keeping taxes flat and not having a lot of places that they feel like they can cut because of all the mandates. So I think that's the rationale that advocates for this spending are up against. And I just want to, I guess, echo something that Carolyn said. I used to cover state politics in Albany. And this is a political institution that most regular people feel like they can't have no chance whatsoever at influencing. These people are, whatever you think about the folks in Albany, most people are pretty pejorative in their thinking about it. But it really made a difference to the legislators when they heard from constituents. They actually are all, despite the fact that no one ever loses elections for the most part, incumbents, in Albany, they're hypersensitive to public opinion, and they all feel like their next election is probably their last one. And so those calls and letters, actually, from my perspective, when I was watching, really did make a difference.
Jim?
No.
I just wanted to
there a model state and a model county somewhere who has a handle on this, and/or have you presented a model in a chapter or some book or something about what we should be doing, kind of like the same?
Nobody.
You mentioned Seattle.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that I can point to a specific model, but I will say there are a number of states. New York does put a lot less funding as a state into this than a lot of other states. So there are other states who have prioritized this more than New York. So they take the federal money and they add a lot more state money and prioritize this. There's also a lot of states, back to the earlier question of, is like subsidies the only answer? Should we be considering other things? And like my reference to Seattle, there are a lot of states who have looked at like universal pre-K for 3-year-olds, who are looking at different options of how do we really ramp up access for a lot of families. So there are other good models out there. I guess the other one model that people are talking about a lot right now are social impact bonds. And essentially this is a way of investing money upfront, you get business and investors to invest money upfront, and then you win from the cost savings that you get from having children in high quality care. Those cost savings get returned basically as investments to the upfront investor. So people are looking at different funding streams, different abilities to do this. So there's definitely good ideas out there to keep us thinking about it. I can't say there's one state in particular, but do you have one, Mike?
So I think it comes down to how important is it for us as a nation, as a community, as a city, as a family of people, to be willing to tolerate the kind of poverty that's around in our community, the folks that are the fact that our children struggle, and generational poverty and concentration of poverty is a problem, a big problem here. How much do we as people and human beings and citizens think that we should be making our government be more responsive to those needs? And I think it's going to really solving this problem is going to take that kind of commitment across not just one segment, but for all of us.
Thank you. I'd just like to piggyback on what the woman said over here about our county legislators and my own experience as someone living in the suburb with a Republican legislator is that he refused to talk to me, meaning that I emailed, I called, and about this issue, and I could not get an appointment with him. I'm a taxpayer, I'm a constituent of his. But my understanding is that this was replicated across many county legislators. And I really believe that some shaming needs to occur because these people need to be accountable. Whatever their decision is, they need to be open to listening to those of us who, for whom this is a real priority.
He knows who you are already. He still needs to talk to you, buddy.
I just have a kind of a half-baked idea that's been ruminating in my mind since Dick said, you know, it shouldn't be a private subsidy, but a public investment. And I was thinking about the history of public education in the United States. You know, it isn't forever that we had this arbitrary 6-year-old to through high school public education entitlement. And that it was for everybody, and there was for girls. And it isn't very long at all that we didn't have community colleges. And why did we get community colleges? Because businesses decided that they needed these kind of training grounds to get their employees better educated for what they needed. So part of it is getting the right groups to think it's in their best interest, their economic interest, to help in making this a real public investment on a broader scale.
Thank you. We appreciate you coming out on our first winter night. We very much want to thank Erica, the Center for Governmental Research, and the panelists. Roy just has a closing comment, and please stop at the table where there are petitions and some advocacy things that we can be doing. We, of course, will assure you that the League, I was the only speaker last night. I was a little taken back when the county executive chose to make her statement in the middle of a presentation on the budget, but I think we'll be able to respond to her challenge. I'll take it as a challenge.
I just want to thank you all for joining us for this important discussion. It gave us a lot to think about. We are grateful to our excellent panel, CGR and the Children's Agenda, and our family groups who came as well, who shared their time and expertise. As many of you know, we present a forum almost every month focusing on issues which impact our community. We look forward to sharing more forums with you in February next year, 2015. So please continue to visit our website and our Facebook pages for updates. Thank you again.